This is a Federal News Network podcast.
Facial recognition is coming to the government's online sign-on service. The General Services Administration plans to add a facial matching feature to Login.gov, along with some other identity verification options. Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me with the latest. And tell us about facial recognition at Login.gov. Sounds like something kind of overdue here.
Login.gov is used by many federal agencies for accessing different programs and services online. They offer, an account authentication option, so you can have this single account to go across multiple agencies. And they do have some identity proofing features, but this will actually raise the stakes or raise the level of identity proofing for Login.gov. GSA released these plans last week. They plan to add this face matching feature to the service starting within the next year. They also plan to offer folks the option to either prove their identity in person at a local post office or through a live video chat with a trained identity verification professional if they don't want to use facial recognition. So that's coming out at some point within the next year here to Login.gov.
And do we know whether they're using a commercial product adopting to that? Because, other entities in the government have facial recognition that they've adapted from some of the commercial algorithms, NEC and so on. Or is that unknown yet at this point?
Well, GSA confirmed to me that they're going to partner with a vendor that uses quote-unquote best-in-class selfie matching algorithms. And they're also evaluating other alternatives. So they don't have any firm plans here, but they're going to use some sort of company's product here to integrate that into Login.gov.
And this is a big deal for Login.gov, which I think has been seen in the government as maybe falling a little bit behind in the state of the art.
Yeah, even though more and more agencies are adopting Login.gov, there's still some issues that have cropped up with the service in recent years. First, earlier this year, Login.gov and GSA came under heavy criticism because between 2018 and 2022, the program actually misrepresented their security standards to customer agencies, saying that they met a certain level of identity proofing standard that they actually didn't. Part of the problem is these standards require perhaps something like a biometric, like face matching in many cases, and Login.gov was not using that for those years that they said they met these standards. So there was a huge review of the program. And now, of course, they're moving to facial recognition. And then, of course, face matching, facial recognition still is somewhat controversial. The IRS, if folks remember last year, pulled back on plans to essentially require most online customers to use a facial recognition service provided by a third party. They still offer that option, but the IRS actually shifted to Login.gov last year instead. So now it's kind of come full circle.
Yeah, people do get uneasy for some reason with that technology. I guess they figure every match-in will be saved, but I think most of the systems dispose of the image once the verification is made. That's true of people leaving and coming into the country through TSA and Customs and Border Protection. And so how will Login.gov's face matching system actually work?
It's going to essentially compare a selfie that you take in the moment to your photo ID. And so it's not going to be going back to a database of photos that are scraped from the web or anything like that. It's just going to be comparing the selfie that you take in the moment to your photo ID. That's referred to as one-to-one face matching, facial recognition, which is typically a little less controversial than the one-to-many type of matching that we often hear about. GSA says the data will never be used for any purpose unrelated to verifying your identity by Login.gov. And they also plan to monitor the effectiveness of its face matching tool across different demographic groups because, some prior research and studies have shown that some facial recognition algorithms are less accurate for non-white faces. So they're going to monitor how well this actually works.
That's interesting, though, comparing a selfie of yourself to some other reference picture that you might have submitted already, say on a license, because the perspective is so different. When you take a selfie, that lens is close to your schnoz, and so your face has a different geometry than when the camera was like 3-4 feet away. And yet, I guess nowadays modern algorithms can correct for that.
Yeah, I guess so. I think we've seen a lot of different companies come out with these products that use a selfie compared to, a photo of your driver's license, right? Especially in the COVID era when so much was shifted to online and then there was so much fraud. So clearly there are a lot of companies working on these different algorithms to really pinpoint that verification.
So it's not there yet, but they plan for it in the next 12 months, GSA.
at some point within the next year, GSA says they will start down this path.
And we said at the top, too, that there are other alternatives for identity verification coming to Login.gov other than facial. What are some of those?
We know that the GSA is going to offer that in-person option as well as that option to do a live video chat with essentially a customer service representative to verify your identity. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, which actually sets the identity guidelines that these agencies have to follow, is also looking at some updates to those guidelines, and they're specifically sought some feedback on whether there's an alternative to facial recognition to meet that higher level of identity proofing standard. NIST actually says that it sees a need for some sort of remote identity proofing option that does not require face recognition. A NIST representative actually spoke at a conference last week, Ryan Galuzzo, Digital Identity Program Lead for NIST. One of the things he mentioned is mobile driver's licenses. Maybe that's an option for identity proofing. We're seeing more and more states roll those out. So NIST is looking at some alternatives to face recognition, even as organizations like GSA are bringing them into Login.gov.
And I guess at this conference, did the plain old-fashioned 6-digit text number sent to you, to your mobile device, which you can log on to with your face for the most part now, did that come up?
So Login.gov does do the authentication using SMS text messaging codes in some cases. They also use things like a YubiKey and things like that. That's on the account authentication side of the house. The identity proofing side of the house is a little harder because you have to have some sort of ID that proves who you are, and then you have to confirm that that's really your ID and that's really you. So that becomes a little bit more complicated.
I think at the advent of the pandemic, when people could not do the gold standard, which was the only one that a lot of agencies used for employees, was in person, so that you had one for sure, that person is really there sitting in front of me. But then to hire a new employee, you couldn't do that during the COVID. So maybe now they've come up with ways for remote ID verification as opposed to strictly login for people that are trusted already.
The key word here is options. I mean, clearly a lot of people want the ability to sit in their house and just sign up for services. That expectation has kind of been created, especially since COVID. But then there are folks who don't necessarily want to use technology or facial recognition, providing them the option to go to a post office to prove their identity instead or something like that seems to be the key.
Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tom.
And check out his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.